All right. We're going to finish chapter 9. Okay, so this is going to be chapter 9, part 2 of Toliver's Secret. And when we left off last time, Ellen decided to walk to Elizabethtown from Perth Amboy, and she kind of came above this fear she had of walking in that dark forest. There were trees everywhere. She felt like someone was chasing her. And then when she stopped, she realized, you know what, this isn't so bad. So we're noticing that Ellen's changing. She was very fearful in the beginning of the story. Do you remember Dicey? She was afraid, well, Ellen was afraid to go to the pump because Dicey was bullying her. And now look at what she's doing. I mean, she took a boat by herself across one of the bays, and, you know, she's delivering this message. So I would say if we talked about character traits now, Ellen is becoming brave and what else could you say? I mean, fearless, maybe. At the beginning of the story, we would not call her brave. We would probably call her scared and shy. So think about that as the book goes on and how Ellen has changed as a character. And also when we left off, she heard a dog barking, and she heard someone kind of coming behind her. "Why you hiding there, boy?" the man called out in a thin, high voice with a twang at the edges. Ellen held her breath. "Are you a neighbor or a runaway?" asked the man suspiciously. "You got a gun?" "I'm not a runaway," said Ellen, "and I haven't any gun." "Then come out and show yourself." Slowly Ellen stepped out from behind the tree. She could see now that it was not a bundle of straw at his throat. It was a dirty, scraggly beard. More straw-colored hair hung down his back in a bushy clump. "What's that in your hand?" The man seemed to talk through his long nose. "Only a loaf of bread." Ellen held up the blue bundle for the man to see. The dog barked and jumped for it so wildly she had to hold it tight above her head to keep it away from him. "Where are you going?" "To Elizabethtown." "To Elizabeth? 13 miles!" He whistled through the space where his 2 front teeth were missing. "You'll never make it. And besides, it will be dark as pitch before you get to Elizabeth." Ellen stared at him. "Did you say 13 miles?" she cried. "I thought it was 10, and I've walked 2 or 3 miles already." "It may be 10 miles as a crow flies, but it's 13 miles by road from Amboy. You've walked about 2, I'd say. That leaves 11 more to go." So here's Ellen, thought she only had 10 miles to walk, so she figured, if I did, 2 miles, maybe I only have about 8 left. Well, it's 13 miles. Oh, poor Ellen. Ellen was too disappointed to say another word. Perhaps the man was wrong. "Well," he grunted as he wiped his fingers across the end of his nose, "my house is only half a mile from Elizabeth. Get up behind me. I need a helper to hold these baskets." As if he had understood what his master said, the horse turned his head to look at Ellen and snorted, disapproving, through his big, loose lips. Ellen jumped back. She had never ridden a horse before. "Step lively, boy," the man spoke crossly. The horse rolled his eyes and shook the leathery skin that stretched over his ribs. He looked far from happy at having another rider, Ellen thought. And the man did not look friendly either, but she never could walk 11 more miles. Since there was nothing else she could do, she'd have to take the ride. The farmer slipped his foot from the stirrup and reached down a bony hand to help her. "How do I climb up?" Ellen asked. "Never been on a horse before?" cried the man in surprise. "A big boy like you?" Remember, girls wouldn't ride horses back then. It was the men that took care of all of that. "No," said Ellen. She was going to say my father was a schoolmaster. He didn't have a horse, but she thought better of it. "Then put your foot here, and I'll give you a hoist." Ellen put her foot in the stirrup and awkwardly climbed and squirmed her way up behind him, clutching the loaf of bread to her chest with one hand. She was glad she didn't have skirts and petticoats to get in the way as she straddled the horse's bony back. Very carefully she tucked her blue bundle inside her jacket and arranged the handles of the baskets on her arms. When she leaned forward and put her arms around the man's waist, she knew the bread was safe between her chest and his thin back. So she was kind of sitting like this, and he was right here. She was kind of holding on to him, and she had the bread tucked right here. Okay, so that bread wasn't going anywhere. From the odd smell of his baskets, it was hard to guess what he had carried in them, but his bushy hair that tickled her face smelled of sweet wood smoke. It was a comforting smell, although sitting behind him like this was an uncomfortable way to travel. The bouncing made her teeth chatter and jarred her spine. Still, it was better than walking 11 miles with the dog jumping at her and trying to get her bread. The man pointed a long finger at the little dog. Go home to your master, he commanded sternly. Now, he said, when he saw the dog scurry off, what's your name, boy? Toliver. She could say that name without stumbling now. Mine's Murdoch. He handed back some oat cakes he took from his pocket. Most boys are hungry, he said. Hungry? She was starved. She had given her corn cakes to Dow on the boat. When he looked over his shoulder and saw she had gobbled them up quickly, he handed her 2 more. But he didn't ask her any questions. They rode in silence to the end of the woods and out along the road, passing more closed-up farmhouses. She wanted to ask him about the people inside, but Mr. Murdoch was not a talkative man. She could not guess whether he was for the British or for the Patriots, so she didn't know at this point. My computer's going to die. He said nothing when he had to stop his horse to let some soldiers ride by. Best not to ask him which side he was on if she wanted to continue her ride. He'd be quite surprised if he knew he was helping the Patriots, especially if he was a Tory. So a Tory was a name for people who were on the British side. If you remember watching one of the Liberty Kids that we watched in Miss Parkinson's social studies class, I forget, Jacques or whatever that boy's name is with the blonde hair, he called out something one time. He was like, look, it's the Tories. I don't know. That brought up memories for me. They were mixed up times, all right. Ellen remembered Long Island and the long trip that she and her mother had made. No one ever asked the refugees who staggered along the roads which side they were on. All of them were people in trouble. Some of them had great rolls of bedding and cooking pots on their backs, and some pulled carts piled high with household goods. On top of everything rode small children in baskets, and the old people. Farm people along the way were kind to them. She peered around Mr. Murdoch's arm and asked, why are those houses all closed up so tightly? The question seemed to make him angry. Ellen could feel his back grow stiff and straight as he cried out, people have to stay behind locked doors these days since the British came. It's those redcoats. They take everything. Just walk in and take anything they want. Do you think he's on the British side or the Patriots? If he's calling them redcoats, you can better believe he is not for the British. They take everything. Just walk in and take anything they want. Most farmers hide their cows in the woods, and pigs and chickens, too. At the sound of the horse's hoofs splashing through water, Ellen looked down fearfully. They were crossing a stream. It was shallow enough, but thin sheets of ice formed around the rocks at the edge. Suddenly, Mr. Murdoch stood up on the stirrups and waved his thin arm as if he had a sword in his hand. King George ain't going to push us around. We'll fight back, he cried. Ellen had tried to keep her hold of his waist as he stood up, but as she raised her arms, she could feel the blue bundle slip down from under her jacket. She lunged for it. My bread! She shrieked. Stop the horse! Your what? Cried Mr. Murdoch as he threw a startled look over his shoulder. He yanked back on the reins. The horse was startled, too. He slipped and slid on the icy rocks, sank down on his haunches, and started up again. My bread! Ellen screamed. My loaf of bread is gone! Mr. Murdoch reined in the horse by the side of the stream. Did you drop my baskets? He yelled. Quickly, Ellen clutched the saddle with both hands, swung her leg over the horse's, and slid down his side. She didn't stop to wonder about the slippery rocks or how deep the water might be. She waded into the stream up to her knees until she could scoop up her bundle. He might have told me he was going to stand up, she grumbled as she opened the kerchief and looked at the bread. It was soggy, but the good strong crust had held its shape. Mr. Murdoch didn't see the need to apologize. Instead, he dismounted, which means he got off the horse, and he gathered up his baskets and shook the water from them angrily. He glared at her. Why did you drop my baskets? It was just lucky they weren't filled with the leather hides I took to Amboy. Ellen hung her head, but she felt defiant. Why, it was his fault. He should have told her he was going to stand up. You made me drop my bread. When you stood up, she declared stubbornly, I had to get it before it floated away and was lost. That was a witless thing to do. Happens my wife would give you another loaf. This is a present for an old man's birthday. My mother baked it this morning, Ellen said hastily, but I'm sorry I dropped your baskets. Come on then, climb back up on the horse, he said. So here's a picture of Ellen. All right, picking up, I know Grayson does not love these illustrations. right? He tells us that whenever we read in class. But here she is. There's her bundle, okay? And she kind of got off the horse. There's the man, all right, and the horse. And they're in that stream. Oops. When they were well on their way, Mr. Murdoch turned to look at her suspiciously. "You're a weird one," he said. "You got something inside that bread?" Ellen gasped. She buried her face in his back and blurted out the first words that came to mind. "I'd get a whipping with a birch rod if I lost it." "Reckon you would," Mr. Murdoch said. "Makes me think of my father. He cut a hole in the bottom of a loaf of bread and put his money inside. That was a silly thing. Anyone could see where the hole was." Ellen was glad the box had been put in the dough and baked inside. There was nothing that would show in case he wanted to look at it. And that was chapter 9. Ooh, she almost got caught twice. All right, we're going to stop there for now. We have a couple more chapters to go. I'll read another one for you for the next day. And just keep in mind, what do you think's going to happen now? She's got a ride with this man, and hopefully he takes her where she needs to go. All right, I'll see you guys later.